We continue to observe Pride Month in October. We look at how far the rights of the LGBTIQA+ community have evolved and aligned with the Constitution of South Africa. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the Civil Union and Marriage Amendment Bill into law, which was gazetted on Thursday and comes into effect immediately. Under the new laws, marriage officers may no longer object to solemnizing a civil union between persons of the same sex. But joining us to talk about this is social justice activist Letlhogonolo Mokgoroane. Letlhogonolo, a very good morning. Thank you for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. I mean, arguably it is a victory for the LGBTQIA community at large. But looking at how this change ultimately brings about the end of discrimination and equity for the community, how has it been received and welcomed?
I mean, I think a lot of, well, Liesl, to say this, firstly, I don't think a lot of people actually knew that Section 6 of the Civil Unions Act was actually law, right? So I remember speaking to a couple of people, and they've been surprised that there are so many challenges facing same-sex couples getting married. But for people who've been fighting this fight for over 14 years, we're really ecstatic about the fact that this is a step in the right direction for true marriage equality in South Africa.
Well, you mentioned that the marginalization and exclusion, that exists when seeking state services, obviously has been brought to the fore with this victory for the community at large. But when we look at Section 6 and the controversies that surround it, I mean, ultimately, since it has been repealed, what does that process look like in terms of exemption and perhaps the work that will go into making sure it comes into effect?
I suppose to start here, Liesl, Section 6 of the Civil Unions Act said that marriage officers could object to marrying same-sex couples on the basis of religion, conscience, and belief. And there was an exemption, so certain marriage officers who work at Home Affairs applied for this exemption with the minister. But we as ordinary people didn't know that this exemption existed. So the effect of that is that I, as a same-sex couple, or a partner in a same-sex couple who wants to get married, would go to Home Affairs, and Home Affairs would tell me that they don't do these marriages. And I wouldn't know that to ask for this exemption to make sure that this person can solemnize or cannot solemnize. So what this amendment has effectively done is, one, done away completely with Section 6. So officials from Thursday are no longer able to say that they don't marry same-sex couples. However, there's a 24-month period for the officials that already have an exemption in order for them to effectively undergo training in order to ready themselves to be able to solemnize same-sex couples. So the effect of it now is that as a same-sex couple, you can go to Home Affairs tomorrow, Monday, and say, I would like to get married, and they should not refuse you marriage. And if they do, my advice is for people to ask where an exemption is for them to not marry these people.
Well, in the same breath then, Letlhogonolo, I just wanted to then also find out if, officials refuse to follow this law and process, ultimately, what do the repercussions look like? I mean, it's one thing to have it enshrined in the Constitution, but the lived reality is something that takes paradigm shifts and conscientizing. So in reality, at this point, as it has been signed into effect, I mean, what do those repercussions look like?
So we're hoping that the Minister of Home Affairs will effectively release a policy, and this policy would say that certain people who cannot adhere to the law should be disciplined, because that's one measure of doing it. But another measure of doing it is effectively accessing the courts, right, and saying to the courts, this person has violated my right to equality and violated the provisions of the Civil Unions Act. So there are a number of civil repercussions, a number of disciplinary repercussions that we hope that the Minister of Home Affairs will take into account. Because the truth of the matter is that we know that even if this law is here, it's going to take some time for people to implement the law. But now the law is here. We're able to say, well, you're violating this law, and therefore there should be some form of disciplinary repercussions for violating this law. And I know the argument has been made about what about people's religious freedoms, right? And the point is this: we live in a constitutional democracy. Constitutional democracy says state functionaries are not supposed to unfairly discriminate on anyone on the basis of, among other things, sexual orientation. So we're just saying everyone is equal before the law and has equal protection of the law. So you, as a state functionary who may have religious freedoms, please leave your religious freedoms as you enter your workplace and give me my constitutionally mandated rights to solemnize my marriage.
I actually just brought about the point I was going to focus on in terms of religion and cultural narratives that seem to permeate society, and obviously, is being questioned during this time as we rewrite those narratives and look at ways in bringing inclusion and, doing away with discrimination at large. But when we look at how religion is interpreted, religion is used to interpret the Constitution in some sectors of society, and you look at the broader issues that the LGBTQIA community at large is facing. I mean, how does one begin to bridge that gap going forward?
Well, I suppose there are a lot of co-conspirators who are in the religious sector who have on a number of occasions says maybe we've read the scriptures wrong and maybe the message of Jesus is to love everyone and for us to be more inclusive. So there's always a back and forth, right, between certain members of a religious group versus other members who are staunch believers in the black letter law of the Bible and people who are like, we should make it more purposive, right? And we are grateful for those people who have come to the fore and be like, I will put my hand up and I will be the one who will accept or allow people to come into the church because Jesus loves everyone. And I suppose, the conversation has been happening because we saw recently that the Pope has said something in support of homosexual or members of the LGBTI community. And what does that look like, right? So what are the conversations that the church is having? We also had seen last week that one of the churches in South Africa had made a decision that it would allow same-sex couples to get married and then later on retracted that decision. So we are seeing that there are also tensions within the church debating these issues.
And just looking at the challenges that the community continues to face, I mean, as the spotlight is shone on during Pride Month, I mean, what are some of the other challenges that the community faces that you're hoping to also gain some traction in terms of policy and law going forward?
I mean, I think one of the greatest difficulties that we're having in South Africa is sort of the pathologized legislation in terms of gender marker and changing your gender marker. So we have what we call the Alteration of Sex Description Act, and it allows a person to effectively change their gender marker. But it's very onerous because it sort of pathologizes and it's very medical. So we're hoping that we can fight for policies that allows for self-determination because it allows trans people to be able to effectively access better rights. And the reason why I say that, Liesl, is this. When you think of people who are trans and their gender marker is not changed, it already puts them in danger. It means that they can't access home loans. It means that they can't access employment. There are a number of things that happen because these people do not have a gender marker that reflects their identity. So we're hoping that we will have a change in terms of gender marker. And the truth is also we're hoping that there will be a single marriage statute. Because right now we have 3 ways in which people get married, but same-sex couples only have one option, whereas heterosexual couples have a number of options. But if we collapse all that into one marriage statute, that will be true marriage equality.
Well, we've definitely seen the strides and progress made, but obviously the struggle continues. Again, I want to thank Letlhogonolo Mokgoroane, a social justice activist, for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. Again, just chatting to us about Pride Month and also the LGBTQIA plus community's rights regarding that new civil union and marriage law that was signed into effect on Thursday.